Help me welcome back Sarah Friedland and Kathleen Chalfant. Sarah and Kathleen, at which stage of this project did you started working together on it?
Very close to the beginning of filming. We were looking for the right actor to play Ruth for years and years and years, and we found her only 2 weeks before production, and so we jumped in very quickly, and we had one of those sort of encounters where it was immediately apparent that it had to be Kathleen playing Ruth, and because we were up against the strike, we had no rehearsal time. And so we just jumped in, but she had long been on my dream list of actors to work with. So it was,
we met the first day of shooting, actually.
And so before it was just Zoom and wow.
We Zoomed. And so we met the first scene we shot was the scene in the elevator with Carol and Michelle, who plays Vanessa, and we knew right away that it was going to work with all of us, and it was necessary because the movie was shot in 18 and a half days, and we only had 8-hour days because we were shooting at Villa Gardens and we could only be there for 8 hours a day. So it was a good thing that it worked.
Sarah, how did your background as a choreographer as well waved into writing this film and making it? How did it affect it?
Yeah, I mean, I think about screenwriting as a kind of form of movement notation. And I start writing characters from their gestures and their everyday movements. And prior to Familiar Touch, the films I had made, they were dance films, but not films about stylized dance. They weren't sort of virtuosic movement, but films about sort of the politics of everyday movement. And so I think about writing films as sort of an accumulation of a character's movements. And so the earliest draft of this script was Ruth's movements around her home of however many decades for the last time, and then her home of we don't know how many years for the first time. And before there were sort of these kind of character arcs with Steve and Vanessa, it was really just sort of observing her body moving through these two spaces. And that was the starting point. And then in terms of the kind of cinematic language of the film, I think the gestural sensibility from making dance films helped me create a perspective for the film that wasn't cognitive. I think so often we get these decline narratives when talking about older adults, particularly older adults with memory loss, that the drama of the film is about a person losing themselves or slipping away. And I think those narratives often sort of eclipse the person who's still there. And so I wanted to find a language to show the Ruth who persists, the Ruth that continues, rather than the Ruth that's lost. And I felt like if we put her perspective, not in her cognition, but in her embodiment, in her sensations, we could be with the Ruth who is with us and who continues. And so with our DP, Gabe Elder, we really sort of thought about creating frames that allowed us to see the sort of smallest shifts in Kathy's expression, her posture, her gestures, and to, basically create a language for the film where Ruth's perspective comes from her physical experience of herself and the world around her rather than her cognition.
And how important was for you, Kathleen, this very physical dimension of the character? How much was on the page, and how much did you find it together?
Such a difficult question to answer, because from my point of view, I was just living. Though none of the only thing that was improvised in the movie was the list of F words. I was given parameters that some of them had to begin with PH and some of them had to do with food. And at some point I had to say fuck. But other than that, every single scene, the only way that it was possible to make the movie with the to make the movie that we've made was because Sarah and Gabe and Steph, the production designer, had worked together for 10 years, and every single scene was written. There were 3 shot lists. The 1, get what we need; 2, get what would be nice; and 3, get what we dream of. And for me, as an actor, it was like walking into a beautifully furnished room and all the chairs worked. So that all I had to do was accomplish the task that was presented in the scene. And the other thing is that if anybody here has ever been to acting school, you know that they always tell you to live in the moment, and it takes about 700 years to figure out what that means. But people who have dementia always live in the moment. They're detached from the past and not moving to the present, so that each scene and the movement in each scene was a complete life. And the thing is that what you see of Ruth's movement is decided by the filmmaker and the cinematographer and the editor. So I always think that what actors do is to provide the furniture, and the director and the editor arrange it.
But it's extraordinary furniture.
Wow.
Sarah, as we were discussing before, the Villa Garden is actually inspired by a facility that was created. You reminded me in the 1920s. I thought it was much more recent. Can you talk a little bit about what it was? Yeah.
Yeah, so Villa Gardens is the name of the real continuing care retirement community that we filmed in, and it's based in Pasadena, California, and it was founded in the 1920s by a group of female educators who pooled their money to buy a property and basically have this care collective. And this is before Medicare, before Medicaid, before there was any sort of safety net for older adults to have care, and the spirit of that very much lives on in this care community, and that it still attracts a lot of educators, social workers, writers. There's very much a spirit of lifelong learning, which was part of what I looked for a long time for the right care facility, and knew that we needed a place where the community was interested in a collaborative and kind of pedagogical experiment, really, because in addition to making dance films, I come from a background as a teaching artist and have been teaching filmmaking to older adults for the last. I've been working in older adult settings since the last 8 years. I was a caregiver for about 4 years for New York City artists with dementia. And it became clear early in the writing process that if we were going to make this intergenerational film that had a kind of anti-ageist ethos to it, that refused the idea that people receiving care no longer have anything to contribute, then we needed to actually make it with older adults and with care workers. And so Villa Gardens, because of this history, there's this sort of interest in lifelong learning. So I most films are greenlit by financiers. Ours was greenlit by this community. I had to pitch it to the all staff meeting, and I pitched it to the residence council. And they're the ones who greenlit our film. And in the 5 weeks leading up to principal photography, we facilitated a filmmaking workshop there. We met twice a week, and the first session of each week, residents did a hands-on practicum with a different member of our crew. So our cinematographer taught cinematography, production designer, production design, etc. And then the second session of each week, they would make a short film of their own design. And every week we would rotate crew roles. So if you were acting one week, you were directing the next. And then at the end of those 5 weeks, everybody signed on to our production in the department that they wanted to be in. So many residents are acting in the film, but just as many worked on the crew. No one signed up for sound and no one signed up for grip because it became clear in the workshop that those were roles that required a lot of schlepping. And so they were less popular departments. But there was, that culture of lifelong learning there is what enabled us to have this production that if you stepped onto our set, it looked a little bit more like an intergenerational artist residency than it did a kind of traditional film set.
I'm going to turn it to your question, but there is something that really struck me. As I said, I found this film, it was a complete surprise for me, and one of the things that is most energizing is Sarah and Kathleen's concentrating on what's there, and how Ruth is negotiating between what's there and what she's losing, and we're seeing it we're seeing it on the screen, we're seeing it in real time, and Kathleen, this intelligence of the this sort of digging into and fighting it, but also accepting it at the same time. What did you do? Anything? Did you read anything? How did you find it? Because it's true that it's the script was there, but there is something about the way you express this very rational struggle in the character that I found sublime.
Oh, thank you. I don't know. I wanted very much to do the movie after I read the script because my best friend, who is the playwright Sybil Pearson, whose work I'm sure many of you know, she was the book writer for Baby and had a long collaboration in musical theater with Michael John LaChiusa, and is almost single-handedly responsible for the growth of musical theater in South Korea. She was part of the NYU musical theater program. She's my best friend. We've known each other since 1973. Our sons were friends starting in kindergarten. And at the time that the movie came to me, Sybil was in about the place Ruth is in her dementia. And so in a way, I was happy to do the movie because it was a tribute to Sybil in a way, but much more than that, I learned how to do it from Sybil. And the thing that's true is that we are all alive from the inside. We're all alive until we're not. And so often, movies about dementia are made from the point of view of the families and the people who are witnessing what looks like loss to them. And the loss is so profound that it makes it difficult to understand the person who remains. But from the inside, you're still alive. You're still living. You live every moment until you don't.
Raise your hands if you want to have a question. Just for her.
Oh, I was wondering if you've shown the film in the community that you filmed in and what the response was, if you have.
They've now seen it 3 times, and a 4th is forthcoming. After we premiered at Venice, we screened at the AFI Film Festival in Los Angeles at the Chinese Theater, and the Villa Gardens rented 2 buses filled with the residents and the staff who worked on the film. So I didn't mention before that the staff were deeply involved. They didn't do the workshop with us, but during those 5 weeks, we met with every department because a care facility runs not unlike a film set in that there's all of these sort of different departments that organize the labor. And so we got to meet with each department and understand the sort of details and rhythms of their work and then create our production schedule around around their schedules and around their work. And then many of the staff members then became performers in the film because we were there for 3 months and we discovered that there were many cinephiles among us. So yeah, they came to our Los Angeles premiere, which was incredible. And then we did a screening inside the care community because of course not everyone was mobile enough to come. And then they rented out a full screening when we had our LA theatrical release. And there are of course as many opinions on the film as there were people in the room. But I think to me what is the most moving is that the residents and the staff call it our movie. They don't call it Familiar Touch, they call it our movie. And there's an immense sense of ownership from the community that it's something that they created, and hearing from them that they felt what we created was truthful, both for the care recipients and the caregivers, means the world to me. But I'd say, for me, the most funny note we got, our producer Alexandra overheard one of the residents in the bathroom say to another, what'd you think? And she said, I don't know, it was pretty Freudian. And I think that's the best note that we got.
So, Kathleen, you played the part beautifully, but I was wondering whether you were ever upset as you were acting because of what the character that you were playing, and whether that resonated with you and worried you a bit.
Well, when I think about that, yes, when it was hard for Ruth, it was hard for me. When it wasn't hard for Ruth, it wasn't. But yes. Because Ruth, she felt betrayed as a lover. She felt betrayed by her son. But she also had a great capacity for joy. So that, another person who saw the movie said a wonderful thing, because they said that their mother lived in a senior community, and what the movie did was to remind them, this person, that their mother had a life when she wasn't there.
Well, I want to congratulate both of you on a truly extraordinary film, and I think that for precisely the reason that you said, it's not only about what one loses in dementia, but what remains. And I think I found it a very painful film to watch, thinking even about my own experience with my own aging parents who are now gone, of the ways that they get infantilized. And I think that this was so well done, showing the taking away of the dignity of the person by infantilizing them. So that's one point I thought was so important and so beautifully done. And why is that necessary? We have to rethink elder care so that that doesn't happen. I wondered if you had any thoughts about that. And the second point is about the relationship with the son. Because I don't know about Freudian, but obviously there were a lot of unresolved issues between this mother and this son that were coming out in this transition. And they're just kind of hinted at in a very subtle way in the film, but I wondered if you could say more about that.
Yeah, thank you for both of those observations. I'll start with the second question and then go to the first. I think it's very common that people with memory loss mistake their adult children for former lovers or partners or spouses. And because it touches the sort of Oedipal taboo, people don't talk about it. And it's something that caregivers navigate all the time. And I saw it with my dad and his mom, that she didn't mistake him for my grandfather, but she would flirt with him. And he would go along with it because it was a way for them to connect and have joy. And so I took it a little bit further, but that was where it was inspired by. And I think for me, part of the title comes from this desire to kind of honor the ways in which people can experience familiarity, they can experience closeness and intimacy, even if they can't identify what the relationship is or name its sort of social function. And I also really wanted to, something that was important to both of us was to honor Ruth's sexuality and the continuity of her sexuality. Because going to your point about infantilization, I think one of the ways ageism and sexism intersect is that older women's sexuality is often treated as the butt of a joke or is denied altogether. And I wanted to show, Ruth's desire, even if it is directed in ways that are uncomfortable. To the first point, I think ageism is one of the forms of bias and discrimination that we don't fully name and acknowledge in our society. And I'll spare you my lecture on it, but I think it has a lot to do with the form of capitalism that we live under, that as soon as people are seen as sort of no longer productive in our marketplace, that we undervalue them and therefore undervalue and underpay the people who care for them. And I think infantilization is one way to make people small that we don't give value to. Think about how older adults are often told that they're cute. Cute is an aesthetic category we give to babies and puppies in a way to make things small. And so I think, there's so much to be said here, but I think we need to have a cultural shift around how we value aging and how we value older adults and the people who care for them, because older adults are the largest growing age demographic globally. In America, 10,000 people each day turn 65 or older. The number of older adults in America is expected to double by 2060. And we are living through a moment where our current administration is defunding Medicaid, and access to older adult care was already precarious and is about to become even more so. So I think we need to have a huge shift in terms of how we value older adults and care for the people who care for them.
There's all this talk about transforming the economy and labor in the United States, but we can't do it because we don't have a labor policy. We have won't go into it. You all know what we have, but part of it is what is considered noble labor. Somehow or another, coal mining, a job that no one would do if they didn't have to, is considered noble labor, whereas caregiving, which is the thing that makes the rest of our lives possible, is considered menial work, and the people who do it are not considered skilled workers. And in the movie, obviously, Villa Gardens is a place for the privileged, but if we valued this work properly, then every single person could get this level of care because the work would be honored and properly compensated.
Yes, thank you.
The use of food was brilliant. And I have to tell you, I have tasted Molly Katzen's Russian borscht. Was the use of food something that you chose because there's sense memories, that it's a universal commodity? Was it something experiential in your family? Say more.
So for those who aren't familiar, Molly Katzen's the author of the Moosewood Cookbook. And we were extraordinarily lucky in that not only did she lend us her recipes and personal archive to exist as Ruth's archive and recipes, including the borscht, but then she also trained Kathy in her knife skills and was on set with us. So she was an extraordinary collaborator. I knew that Ruth was going to be a sort of creative artist and intellectual of some kind, and was playing around in the draft. Would she be a writer? Would she be another type of artist? And I landed on food for two reasons. One, as you sort of alluded to, I wanted her form of artistic expression to appeal to all of her senses, that we would experience Ruth in her olfactory, in her touch, taste, etc. The other reason was I wanted to place her in this sort of milieu of left-wing feminist, Jewish women who were coming of age in this countercultural moment. And food and cooks, I think, is really sort of interesting in these feminist polemics, because we see cooking as women's work, and yet it's a very, very male-dominated field. And so it's something that I got to sort of research in part by talking to Molly about her experience as a female cook and cookbook author in this moment when there were very few, and how that kind of coincided with, the 60s and 70s and Back to the Land and feminism, and these sort of how food was almost a kind of held these different political moments, even if it wasn't, sort of always explicit in the food itself. And then also wanted sort of some kind of taste memories that would tie her to her Jewish immigrant upbringing, because I knew that we weren't going to get to know Ruth's past through flashbacks. We were going to get to know Ruth's past through senses and through kind of material details in the present moment. So that's where the food came from.
Yeah, okay. I noticed that you did a lot of very long takes, and which I thought at a certain point, well, that's very bold of you, because we're so used to everything being cut. And so I'm curious as to, was this a thing that you had said from the beginning, I'm going to do very long takes, or is this a rhythm that you found in the editing room? Because I found when you went to the center, it's a different sense of time. And so I felt like we don't have that same kind of thing of like time where we have to be somewhere and do something at a certain time, other than the routines that they had. So I thought that you created a brilliant rhythm that was very different from most films that we see. And so I'm just curious how that rhythm was discovered.
Thank you for that. I'm a lover and student of slow cinema, so I think this is actually kind of fast comparatively. But I from the script, it was very clear to me that we needed to be in Ruth's time, and Ruth's sense of time is going to shift depending on what version of herself shows up. I mean, one of the two of the earliest choices we made as a director-actor collaboration was, as Kathy was alluding to earlier, that each scene was going to be its own temporal universe, that we weren't going to, I think on day 2, we decided that we weren't going to talk about what came before and what came after. And the other thing that was sort of, it was in the script, but something that we were sort of deliberate with playing with, was the idea that Ruth was going to show up not just as 80-year-old Ruth, but all of the Ruth that she had been, child Ruth, teenage Ruth. And one of the greatest joys for me in this collaboration was getting to watch Kathy sort of surprise me with these different sort of textures of Ruth's age identity, and getting to witness that on the day was extraordinary. So, to a certain degree, the length of the takes was there in the script, a sense of time. I think you can kind of write based on line breaks and kind of how long a sentence is. I think for me, it's quite fun to play with that in a script. But so much of it comes from just attuning our edit to Kathy's performance. And for example, when I think Ruth is 20-something Ruth showing up as the line cook, her sense of time is very different than, the Ruth that's feeling lonely and isolated and perhaps more in the present moment. So to a certain degree, it was in the script, but then so much of it came from attuning our cut to her performance and wanting to just reside with her in whatever she was experiencing.
Kathleen, do you wanna add something in respect of this idea of the different time frame? You know, because you, as you pointed out at the very beginning, you were this thing was about being in the acting the present, but at the same time you shifted in her life story so much in between the different presents of it.
So is that it?
Yes, but do you want to say something about adjusting to the different times of her life?
Well, I think it was exactly what Sarah said. I think all of us do it to some extent in all our lives from the inside. But the sort of one of the great freedoms of dementia is there's an enormous amount of disinhibition, so that if you find yourself, say, in the swimming pool, I hope everyone finds themselves in that swimming pool. It was a great thing to do. But if you find yourself in the swimming pool, you can entirely become the child in the swimming pool. If you find yourself in the kitchen, you remember. You don't remember, you become that person, because all of the moments of our lives are somehow in there. And we who live in memory sort of see life in a teleological way. But if you're separated from the past and the future, you only live as you feel.
That's the question here.
I thought that was an utterly brilliant movie, and I was really rocked by it. I was in tears. It was very powerful. I knew it would be brilliant because Kathy was the lead. I fell in love with Kathy, I think, when she performed Wit. How long ago was that? It's a long time. Yeah, no, I mean, it's brilliant acting, and what a powerful story. You've presented the challenge of trying to bring greater sensitivity and awareness of the need for appreciation, respect for caregivers. How can we do that? What can you give us as guidance in how we can help to do that?
I mean, I think the first thing would be to call your representatives and tell them to oppose this budget bill that's gutting Medicaid, because it's so like the care infrastructure of the country is so tied to how care workers are compensated and valued.
And also to stop the masked thugs from breaking into people's houses and taking them away.
I mean, I think it's such a great question. I really appreciate it, because I think there's, infrastructure and political side, is one piece of it, but there needs to be a sort of hearts and minds shift in terms of how we, as Kathy was saying, how to start seeing it as the most important work that there is, because it's the work that makes life possible. So, I mean, I guess I would encourage you to talk to other people about their care needs and wishes. I think we live in a society that people are more likely to talk about their funeral plot than they are for how they'd like to be cared for if they need care. So I think talking about care needs and making that conversation something that is normalized, and having the role of the caregiver be acknowledged as a part of that conversation, whether it's a family caregiver or a paid care worker. So I think that would be one step. And I mean, we worked with a wonderful organization called Caring Across Generations. This is their entire work, that they are trying to change how we value care. Caring Across Generations. And so I think if you go to their website, there are a lot of different ways to plug into their work. They're doing work through sort of film and television, through labor organizing, through advocacy. So I think they also have great resources of different ways you can get involved.
And it would be wonderful to have community conversations that included people being cared for and caregivers as part of the conversation, as equals. I think it's what one of the things that Sarah was saying. We need to change how we think about it, and to think every time every time you see someone pushing a child along the street that is obviously not its parent, somehow or another that child has been given to that person for that time. There's no greater form of trust, but we don't treat it that way. We don't think about it in that way. And so I think there needs to be, instead of throwing people in prison, dragging them out of their homes, I think there needs to be a huge community conversation about that relationship, which is a relationship that touches all of us. The sacrifices that people who are caregivers give. People who are parents who are looking after someone else's child, who's looking after their children. People who are in-home caregivers, who live 24 hours a day with someone you know, 3 or 4 days a week, leaving an entire family behind. Those of us who are on the privileged end of that exchange need to think very seriously about what it is we're asking of other people and what that means and how we can arrange a system in which justice is done to everyone. It's not a zero-sum game.
As the release of the film came out at Film Forum, an open film forum in June in New York, and has since been shown everywhere, in lots of places in the country. Has the film started conversation of this kind? And there was part of the release that actually included targeted screenings to foster conversation on the subject.
Yeah, I mean, we were able to offer free tickets to low-income seniors and care workers across the country to come to screenings. We obviously weren't able to go to every single one, so a lot of the feedback we got was through sort of emails from these different care recipient and caregiver groups that went to see the film. But certainly at the Q&As that we've done, we've had lots of older adults and care workers and audiences come and talk to us afterwards. And I think one of the things that I've noticed from our Q&As is how many people feel isolated in their experience around aging and care. So many people come up and talk to us afterwards about their experience of their own care with someone they love, and people come and share it as if it's this secret. And I think we've been trying to get people in audiences to talk to each other, because it's something we all share in common, that all of us will be care recipients and caregivers within our life. So yeah, that's a long way of saying yes. And it's been really special to hear from people about their own experiences.
I think there was you had a question, yeah.
This might seem like a deeply shallow question after that amazing forum we just had. But I have to, once I realized, I kept looking at the film going, do I know these actors? I mean, of course I know Kathleen, but it was so strange because I kept thinking, is that somebody I know? And then when you told me that it's all the people that are living at the actual home, I just was gobsmacked. What was that like for you as a director? I mean, I can't imagine what your outtakes must be like, because how did you direct them? How did they take your direction? I'm just so curious, because it's one of the most seamless combinations of literal and, the great creator over there, the great illusion maker. I mean, it was seamless. So could you talk about how you pulled that off? how they pulled it off too.
I'd say that the place where the seams were the least seamless is the biggest issue we had is that people would become mesmerized by Kathy and would start staring at her as soon as she started saying her lines. And so our extras and supporting characters would be doing a great job and would be, in the scene. And then some people, at the minute Kathy started talking, they just would be staring at her, which of course wouldn't work for the scene. So those were the sort of rockiest moments. I think it was only possible because we did this workshop. So by the time that I said action on our first take, the whole community didn't just know me, but they knew our entire crew, and they knew the mechanisms of film production, and they knew exactly what they were stepping into, and it enabled people to sign up for what they felt they could contribute. So the residents who played who had acting roles were residents who showed immense talent in the workshop in acting. And so it meant that, no, they did not have the decades of experience that Kathy had, but they had enough understanding that they could step in and join her and our other professional actors, Carolyn Michelle and Andy McQueen and Aishan Benjamin. And I think also it was such a reciprocal relationship. They really taught us so much about the sort of nuances of tone, particularly around humor. One of the first things that the residents said to me when I pitched the film was, you have to get the sense of humor right. It can't be too depressing because there's so much absurdity in our everyday life, but you can't be laughing at us. You have to be laughing with us. And they spoke to this sort of tonal tightrope walk around laughter. And I think the fact that the funny beats are all Kathy's acting opposite real residents and all, like the chip clip, the magnifying glass. And so I think they gave us a lot in terms of the tone of the laughter.
And then there are cultural things too. You must know that Jean, who was the MC of the speed dating, is Frederick March's niece. So it's genetic in some way. Jean hadn't acted before, but she'd watched her uncle.
We have time for one more, if there is. Okay, I'll ask it then. Stylistically, one of the other things that strike me is how the control and formal inventiveness of the film, and the control and just the assuredness of it. And can you talk a little bit about your design, stylistic design of it?
I mean, one of the first choices that I made with our DP, Gabe Elder, was that the camera would be placed at the position of a caregiver, in the sense that we would be close enough to Ruth to pick up on these sort of subtle details in her behavior that you then decode as a caregiver how a person is doing, but distant enough that we would feel her sense of autonomy. And of course, that's a modulation of distance, that's a whole range. But that was one of the early choices we made, was that we would be kind of playing within that modulation of distance. And then, another early choice stylistically was that we were going to be in static frames the majority of the time, so that the sort of details of her physical performance would kind of resonate at a scale as if it was a full body dancing, even when it's, just a hand flipping open. And I think, a lot of that had to do with what we were talking about earlier, this sense of the perspective of the film being sensory and embodied rather than cognitive. I think also we were thinking a lot about the film having a sense of tactility, and wanting to feel Ruth's desire not only as a sort of sense of sexual or romantic desire, but a desire for sensory experience, that you would want that you would see these shots and want to touch something alongside her. So yeah, everything was kind of, the style was arranged around an idea of sense making, and that. Thank you. We worked with a wonderful sound designer named Eli Cohen, and the sound design was built around hearing the world as Ruth does. Something that happens with dementia is that people's senses are often amplified. Their cognition declines, but touch, taste, smell sound can be very, very intense for people with memory loss, especially a sense of spatial orientation, that distant sounds can be very close and can be a collapsing. So Eli, one of the early choices we made was to mix it sort of in the opposite way that most people mix a film. Usually you kind of turn down all of the ambient sounds so that you can hear the kind of dialogue and Foley of a person. And we did the opposite and sort of brought all of the sounds of the world around Ruth closer. And he's also a composer, so he kind of would pull out different tones from all of the kind of institutional sounds, so the flickering of the lights, the HVAC, and then would kind of take these pitches, and there's no score, but there are these kind of layers of sound that we treated as score. And I mean, to go back to the question about ageism, one of the ways that ageism shows up in our film industry is that the canned sound of room tone that people throw into movies to get a sense that there's a crowd, it's all younger voices. So we actually had to do 3 recording sessions where we invited groups of older adults to come and gossip for us, so that we could have voices that were older. And so all of the room tone, another room tone, the kind of group walla that you hear, is all stuff that we had to record, which was really fun to ask people to come and gossip for hours for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you both, and thank you for coming.